Hey there, night dwellers. Welcome back to Nightmare Frequency. Before we descend into tonight's chilling tale, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below letting us know where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now, dim the lights, get cozy, and prepare yourself for another journey into the unknown.
The first time I heard about the Whisper Sleep podcast, it was from a coworker named Heather, who had the kind of sleepless, hollowed-out eyes you see in horror movies. She swore it helped her sleep better after her insomnia had taken a dangerous turn. "It's just stories," she said, voice low like she was embarrassed. "Real scary stuff. People say it kinda pulls you under." I shrugged it off at first. I was used to late nights, used to lying awake until 3 or 4, staring at the dark ceiling while my thoughts gnawed holes through my mind. One night, half out of desperation, I searched for it. There was no app, no website. You had to find a barely functioning forum, scroll through hundreds of threads of people half begging for an invite link, and if you were lucky or unlucky, you found it. The first time I played it, I was alone in my apartment, rain tapping against the windows, the occasional gust of wind hissing against the glass. The podcast started with a strange static hum that vibrated in my chest. Then a voice, low and soft, like it was speaking right into my ear. "Tonight's tale," it whispered, "is about the ones who watch us from the corner of the room, just beyond the edge of our vision." The story that night was about a man who, while lying in bed, saw a dark figure slowly inching toward him each time he blinked. The narrator's voice was hypnotic, wrapping around me like a weighted blanket. I drifted into sleep without realizing it for the first time in weeks. When I woke up, the apartment felt wrong. The air was heavy, and I was certain someone had been in the room with me. The door was still locked, but the lingering scent of something damp and old clung to the air. I shook it off. It was a scary story. That was the point. Still, when the night came, I listened again and again. Each night, the stories grew darker, more personal. A woman whose dead son knocked on her door every night at exactly 2:04 a.m. A man whose reflection started moving independently. A child who could hear whispering under his bed, whispering that grew louder the more he ignored it. Sleep came easier, but so did the dreams. Twisted, broken visions, faces without eyes, voices calling my name from rooms I didn't recognize, shapes standing at the foot of my bed, watching, always watching. Then the waking events began. The first was small, my phone disappearing from my nightstand and showing up in the bathroom sink, screen cracked and dripping wet. Then came the cold spots, patches of freezing air moving across my apartment like something unseen was pacing. Still, I kept listening. I needed it now. It was an addiction, fear in exchange for rest. One night, the narrator's tone shifted. "Tonight's tale is about you." I froze, half under the covers, the room around me thick with darkness. A girl lies in her bed, shivering under thin sheets. She listens, helpless, as something enters her room. It stands over her, breathing raggedly, waiting for her to fall asleep. I sat up, heart thundering. In the dim light from the street lamps outside, I saw it. Something taller than a man, long-limbed and hunched, lurking by the door. Its face was a smear of darkness. No features, no eyes, just the suggestion of a grin that pulled too wide, too sharp. I blinked, and it was an inch closer. I lunged for the light switch, fumbling, desperate, and when the bulb flared to life, the thing was gone. My heart hammered against my ribs, my mouth dry, throat raw from a scream that never made it out. That morning, I packed a bag and stayed with my sister. I didn't tell her why. I couldn't even put it into words without sounding insane. But the damage was done. The Whisper Sleep had become something more than a podcast. It was a bridge, an invitation. At my sister's house, the first few nights were quiet, normal. Then I woke to scratching against the window, even though her apartment was on the 3rd floor. My dreams became worse, tangled nightmares of blackened hallways and voices whispering in my ear, telling me to come home. I smashed my phone one night, hoping to cut it off, to sever whatever connection I'd made. But it was too late. You can't just listen. You become part of it. The realization struck me hardest when Heather called. "I made a mistake," she sobbed. Her voice was barely human over the phone, choked and trembling. I thought I could live with it, but it doesn't stop. It doesn't go away. I heard something behind her, a low growling breath, then a wet tearing noise. The line went dead. I knew I should have run, left town, something. But something inside me, the same thing that had once craved those whispered stories, held me in place, rooted me to the spot. I was too deep. That night, alone in the guest room, I woke to the sound of the door creaking open. I stared into the darkness, paralyzed. Something was there. Not just watching this time, moving closer. The sheets were torn from my body, yanked by invisible hands. I screamed, a soundless cry, as the mattress tilted and something cold and slimy wrapped around my ankle, dragging me toward the dark, yawning mouth of the closet. I kicked, thrashed, but it was like struggling against tar. Then I remembered something I had heard, buried deep in one of the earlier episodes, something about naming it, binding it back to the place it came from. But I didn't know its name. Still, I tried. I screamed whatever came to mind. Words, prayers, curses. The thing hissed, recoiling, and I scrambled back onto the bed, flicking on every light in the room. The house felt wrong, tilted, like reality itself was bending. In the reflection of the window, I saw it still standing there, just beyond the reach of light, seething. I couldn't stay. I had to end it. I drove across town to the spot where Heather said she first heard about the podcast. A crumbling old bookstore, long abandoned. I kicked in the rotten door, the smell of mildew and mold making me gag. Inside, dust danced in the beam of my flashlight. In the center of the floor was a scorched, blackened circle, as if something had burned its way out of the earth itself. Piles of ancient, crumbling cassette tapes lay scattered around it. I understood then. It wasn't a podcast. It was a ritual. The stories were vessels. Each listener fed it, opened themselves up to it. I poured the gasoline I'd brought in a wide arc around the room, the flames catching quickly, eating up the rotten wood and crumbling tapes. As the fire roared, I heard it. A scream not from a human throat, but something deeper, older, and filled with rage. I barely made it out before the roof collapsed in a shower of embers. For a few blessed days it was quiet. No scratching, no breathing shadows, no whispering. I slept. But now sometimes, just before I drift off, I swear I can hear it, the faintest hiss of static, the barest whisper. Tonight's tale is not over yet. And somewhere, someone else will find it. Someone else will listen, and it will be waiting.
Story number 2.
It was a cold November evening when I found the house. I wasn't supposed to be driving that way. I had missed my exit hours ago, and now I was on a narrow road lined with trees, the sky a flat slab of gray. My phone had no signal, and the last gas station I passed looked abandoned. I should have turned around, but instead I kept driving until I saw it. A house standing alone in the middle of a wide field, black against the dying light. Something about it called to me. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the fog creeping in behind me. I told myself it was just shelter for the night, just somewhere to rest until morning. The house was tall and old, windows like blind eyes, the front door swinging open slightly with the wind. I hesitated at the threshold. The air smelled like iron and damp soil. But I stepped inside. The floorboards groaned underfoot. The hallway stretched long and crooked, walls stained and peeling. There was no furniture, no sign that anyone had lived there for decades. Yet the house breathed. You could feel it in the walls, the slow in and out, like lungs coated with dust. I tried to rationalize it. Old houses made noises, but this wasn't noise. It was rhythm, alive. I found a small room near the front, a bare wooden floor, a cracked window, and sat against the wall, pulling my jacket tight around me. I would leave at first light, I promised myself. The house had other plans. At first, it was the sound of footsteps, light and quick like a child running barefoot across the floor above me. Then the whispering started, soft and wet, like lips brushing against my ear. I couldn't make out words, only the urgent, hungry tone. I squeezed my eyes shut, hands clamped over my ears. But then something laughed, a high, broken giggle that echoed down the hallway. I bolted up, fumbling for my flashlight. Its weak beam cut through the darkness, catching glimpses of the walls. Deep scratches raked through the plaster, symbols carved and bleeding dark stains. The temperature dropped sharply, my breath puffing white in front of me. I turned to leave and froze. A figure stood at the end of the hall. It was a woman, or what had once been a woman. Her limbs were too long, joints bending the wrong way. Her face was twisted into a rictus grin, skin stretched tight over bone, black pits where eyes should have been. She moved toward me without walking, gliding over the floor as if drawn by invisible strings. I stumbled back into the room, slamming the door shut. I pushed my body against it, heart pounding so loud I thought it would burst. The handle jiggled once, twice, then stopped. Silence. I thought it was over, until I heard the whisper right against the wood. "Let me in." I backed away slowly, the flashlight flickering. The air grew thicker, like invisible hands were pressing down on my chest. A drip of something cold and slimy hit my shoulder. I looked up. The ceiling bulged and breathed, sagging as if something massive crawled on the floor above. I turned to the window, the only way out. It should have been easy. Smash the glass, climb through. But when I looked through the pane, the world outside was gone. There was no fog, no trees, no sky, only darkness, thick and endless, and thousands of hands pressed against the other side of the glass. Pale, twisted fingers scraping, scratching, desperate to get through. The flashlight flickered again and died. I screamed, swinging my elbow into the window, but the glass didn't break. It felt like punching stone. Behind me, the door creaked open on its own. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help it. The woman was there, closer now, her mouth stretching wider, the corners tearing open like wet paper. Her jaw unhinged, a black void yawning inside. And from the darkness in her mouth, something began to pour out. Not words, not breath. My memories. Scenes from my childhood, my happiest moments, my worst fears, all leaking out and swirling around me. I could see my mother laughing. I could see myself as a little boy, crying alone in the dark. I could see my future, empty, hollow, consumed. The house fed on it. It devoured who you were. I ran, not knowing where I was going, stumbling through endless hallways that twisted and turned, folding back on themselves. Every door led to the same room, the one where she waited. Finally, gasping and bleeding from unseen scratches, I collapsed on the floor. I had no energy left to fight. The house whispered lovingly to me, "Stay, stay forever." The woman bent down, her face inches from mine. She reached out a withered, clawed hand and touched my forehead. The world cracked, and then I was outside. I was standing in the middle of the field, the house behind me, its windows now dark and empty. Morning light burned away the mist. Birds sang. It was over, or so I thought. Because when I finally got back to civilization, when I found a motel, collapsed into bed, and turned on the TV to drown out the silence, something was wrong. Every channel was static, and in the static a whisper, "Stay." I tried to leave the next morning, but every road circled back to the same house. I am still here, still trying, still running, and every night when I close my eyes I feel her watching, waiting for me to stop fighting. Because once you enter, you never really leave.
Story number 3.
I used to volunteer at a hospice center. It wasn't glamorous work, changing linens, reading to the patients, sitting with them so they wouldn't die alone. Death was just a part of it. You get used to the way it clings to the air, how it makes the walls seem thinner, the lights colder. But there was one room, room 217, that I avoided whenever I could. The nurses didn't assign it often. Patients who went in never stayed long, one way or another. No one talked about it directly, but there were whispers, stories. You could feel it too, the way the temperature dropped when you got near the door, the smell of iron and something sickly sweet that no amount of bleach could erase. One night, around 2 a.m., I was alone on the floor. The other volunteer had gone home sick. It was quiet, except for the occasional beeping of monitors. Then the call light from 217 went off. I stared at it, dread pooling in my gut. I could ignore it, pretend I didn't see. But my legs moved anyway. The door creaked as I pushed it open. The room inside was pitch dark, the overhead light blown out. The only illumination came from the window where the moon hung, too large and too yellow. The bed was empty. No patient, just a crumpled sheet and the faint indentation of a body that was no longer there. I turned to leave and the door slammed shut. I lunged for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The air grew colder, my breath frosting in front of me. Then I heard it, a voice right behind me, raspy and broken, like it was trying to remember how to speak. "Stay with me." I spun around, heart hammering, and saw a figure crouched in the corner. A woman in a hospital gown, her limbs bent at impossible angles, her hair matted and wet. Her eyes were wide and glassy, mouth slack and leaking black fluid down her chin. I backed up, pounding on the door, screaming for help. The woman began to crawl toward me, her hands slapping wetly against the tile floor. Faster and faster, and then a snap. Her neck twisted violently to the side and she collapsed. Silence. The door swung open on its own. I bolted, running to the nurse's station, breathless, shaking. The night nurse on duty, a tired-looking woman named Susan, gave me a concerned look. "From 217, she asked, not even needing me to explain. I nodded, unable to speak. She sighed heavily, like she'd seen this before. "They call it the hungry room," she said quietly. "It doesn't want patients. It wants us, the living." I quit the next day. But the story doesn't end there, because last week I started getting phone calls at night, always at 2 a.m. When I pick up, there's only the sound of wet breathing, and sometimes, very faintly, a voice whispering, "Stay with me." I smashed my phone, changed my number, moved cities. It didn't help. Last night I woke to find my bedroom door creaking open, a cold wind brushing against my face, and the faintest sound of wet hands slapping against the floorboards.
Story number 4.
I first heard about the Bellman's Rest when I moved into the city. It was an old hotel tucked between two skyscrapers, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. The kind of place no one stayed at for long. The kind that smelled like damp carpet and old cigarette smoke. The rumor was if you checked into room 909 and stayed the whole night, you'd either leave with a blessing or never leave at all. I wasn't superstitious. I was broke, desperate, and the Bellman's Rest was cheap. The desk clerk didn't say much when I asked for a room, just slid over an ancient brass key and muttered, "9th floor." The elevator creaked and groaned as it climbed. The doors shuttered open onto a hallway that looked like it hadn't seen light in decades. Wallpaper peeled like dead skin, and the carpet was stained dark in places I didn't want to imagine. My room was at the very end, room 909. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. It was freezing cold, the air damp and sour. The lamp by the bed gave off a sickly yellow light, flickering every few seconds. The window looked out onto a brick wall, as if the building had grown tired of seeing the outside world. I tried to sleep, but the noises started almost immediately. Soft footsteps pacing back and forth just outside my door, the sound of someone breathing, ragged and wet. A low, guttural hum, almost like chanting. I pulled the thin blanket over my head and told myself it was just a weird old building. Nothing supernatural. Then the knocking began. 3 sharp raps at the door. I froze, heart pounding so loud it hurt. I waited, holding my breath. Another knock, louder this time, in a voice. "Bellman," it croaked, barely human. "May I come in?" I didn't answer. I knew instinctively that if I spoke, if I acknowledged it, I was done. Minutes stretched into hours. I didn't sleep, I didn't move. Just before dawn, the knocking stopped. I stumbled out as soon as the sun rose, barely able to hold the key steady as I returned it to the desk. The clerk didn't look surprised, just nodded grimly and said, "You lasted." I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. That night, back at my new apartment, I was brushing my teeth when I heard it. 3 sharp knocks at my front door. I stared at it, toothbrush still in hand, foam dripping from my mouth. Then the voice came, clearer this time, right against the wood. "Bellman, may I come in and move?" Didn't breathe. After a while, the knocks stopped. But when I checked the peephole, no one was there. Except 3 long, deep scratches had gouged their way down the wood, as if someone, or something, had dragged their nails across it. The scratches haven't gone away. Every morning they're deeper, spreading across the door like cracks in ice. I haven't slept in days, because now it's not just the knocking. Now at exactly 3:09 a.m., the door handle rattles, and a voice whispers from the keyhole, "I am already inside."
Story number 5.
When I was a kid, my grandmother used to warn me about the Field of Whispers. It was a patch of land just outside her town, barren, blackened soil where nothing grew, not even weeds. Locals said it was cursed. At night, if you stood too close, you could hear voices calling your name, begging you to come closer. I thought it was just a ghost story to keep curious kids out of trouble, until I went there myself. It was the summer I turned 17, and a group of us, bored, reckless, decided to sneak out and see if the stories were true. We brought flashlights, backpacks full of snacks, and that stupid teenage invincibility that makes you think nothing bad could ever happen. We parked our bikes by the old fence and crossed into the field. The moment my foot touched the soil, the world changed. The air grew heavier, thicker, tasting like burnt metal. Our flashlights, brand new, flickered and dimmed, their beams barely reaching a few feet ahead. The ground was soft and uneven, squelching under our boots. We should have turned back, but the whispers started and it was too late. At first, it was faint, just a word here, a syllable there. But as we walked deeper into the field, the voices grew louder, more distinct. They knew our names: Sarah, Mike, Dylan, Evan. They called to us in the voices of our loved ones, mothers, fathers, brothers long gone. I heard my grandmother's voice, sweet and broken, calling me home. Sarah was the first to disappear. One moment she was laughing nervously right behind me. The next, there was only her flashlight on the ground, spinning wildly in the dirt. We screamed for her. We ran toward where she had been, but all we found was her shoes, still laced neatly together, the toes pointing toward the center of the field. Mike and Dylan wanted to leave. Evan argued. He said it was a prank, that Sarah was hiding to scare us, but we knew better. Because now the whispers weren't just calling our names. They were pleading. Help us. Don't leave. It hurts. We ran. Or at least we tried. The field twisted as we moved. The fence, the bikes, the road, all of it seemed to vanish. Every direction we turned, we were deeper in. The ground started grabbing at us, sucking at our shoes, pulling us down. Mike was next. 1 second he was ahead, the next he was sinking into the earth, screaming, arms flailing wildly. We tried to grab him, but the soil sucked him under like quicksand, closing over him with a wet gulp. We didn't stop after that. We ran until our lungs burned, until the whispers drowned out our own thoughts, until we saw something ahead, a light, a single lamppost, bent and rusted, standing in the middle of nowhere. Evan raced toward it, and that's when they appeared. Figures, dozens of them, rising from the soil like corpses from graves. Their faces were blank, hollow sockets where eyes should have been, mouths stitched shut with black wire. They staggered toward us, arms outstretched. Dylan froze, paralyzed with fear. The things reached him first, pulling him down without a sound, their hands sinking into his body as if he were made of clay. Evan and I made it to the lamppost. We huddled under its weak, flickering light, too afraid to move. The creatures circled us, pacing just beyond the light's reach, their stitched mouths quivering like they were straining to scream. We stayed there until dawn. When the sun rose, the field seemed to retreat, the soil hardening again, the whispers dying away like mist. Evan and I stumbled out, shaking, broken. We tried to tell the police, but they found no trace of Sarah, Mike, or Dylan. No disturbed ground, no footprints. It was like they had never existed. Evan never spoke about that night again. 3 months later, he vanished from his bed, leaving only a pile of dirt and a faint, whispering echo in his empty room. Now, years later, I hear the whispers, even miles away from the field. At night, when I'm alone, they scratch at the windows, slither under the doors, crawl into my dreams. They call my name. Finish what you started. I know one day I'll go back. I won't have a choice, because you can leave the field of whispers, but it never really leaves you.
Story number 6.
I moved into the apartment because it was cheap. Too cheap. The landlord barely spoke, just handed me the keys with shaking hands and muttered something about not staying after dark. I should have listened, but I was desperate. I figured it was just old building superstitions, creaky pipes, thin walls. The first night was fine. The second night, I noticed the mirror. It was an antique thing, mounted to the wall in the hallway. Oval-shaped, framed in tarnished silver, its surface cloudy with age. I didn't think much of it until I caught a glimpse of something moving inside it. Not my reflection, something else. A tall figure, gaunt and pale, standing just behind me, its hands curled like claws. When I spun around, the hallway was empty. I laughed it off. Lack of sleep, shadows playing tricks. I didn't even touch the mirror. Just covered it with an old bedsheet and went to bed. At 3:13 a.m., I woke up to the sound of fabric tearing. The sheet had been ripped off, and the mirror was bleeding. Thin, dark rivulets trickled down the glass, pooling on the floor. The room smelled metallic, sharp and wrong. My heart hammered so loudly I thought it would wake the neighbors. I backed away, refusing to look directly into it, but something moved inside. Slowly, steadily, the figure pressed its face against the glass. Its eyes were hollow, skin gray and rotting, and it smiled at me, a wide, unnatural grin that stretched too far. I turned on every light in the apartment, blaring music, trying to drown out the oppressive silence that followed. Somehow I fell asleep with the lights on. The next morning, the mirror looked normal again. Maybe I was losing it. Maybe. But that night, the knocking started. Not at the door, not at the windows, at the mirror. Soft, deliberate taps, like fingernails against glass. I tried ignoring it, locking myself in my bedroom. But when I checked the hallway the next morning, handprints smeared the wall around the mirror. Long, dragging marks as if something had been clawing its way out. I decided I had to get rid of it. I grabbed a hammer, swung as hard as I could. The glass didn't shatter. Instead, it rippled like water. And something grabbed me. A cold, bony hand bursting through the surface, clutching my wrist. It pulled hard, and for one horrifying second, my arm sank into the mirror up to the elbow. I screamed, yanking myself free, stumbling backward. My skin where it had touched the mirror was already bruising, black and green veins spreading up my arm like vines. I packed a bag that night and ran. I didn't bother locking the door. Didn't think I had to. Now I sleep at a friend's place, or at least I try to. But wherever I go, reflections move when I don't. Bathroom mirrors, car windows, shiny metal on the subway. Always something almost visible, just at the edge of sight. It's getting closer. Last night I woke to find a mirror standing at the foot of my borrowed bed. It wasn't there before, and in it I could see not myself but a yawning black tunnel, and something slowly crawling out. I don't know how much longer I can run. I think it's already inside, waiting for me to look just a little too long, waiting for me to slip up. And when I do, I won't be able to look away.
Story number 7.
When I was 12, my parents bought a house deep in the countryside. It was a fixer-upper, ancient, abandoned for decades, with ivy strangling the stone walls and broken shutters hanging like crooked smiles. They said it was an investment, but even at that age, I knew it felt wrong. The house had a third floor nobody ever went to. The staircase leading up was narrow and steep, the wood warped and splintered. Mom and Dad sealed it off, said it wasn't safe. We lived on the first 2 floors, and that was fine, until the noises started. At night, just past midnight, I'd hear footsteps pacing above my room. Heavy, deliberate, back and forth, back and forth. Sometimes they stopped right over my bed. I'd hold my breath, waiting for the sound to move again, terrified it wouldn't. When I told my parents, they just laughed it off. Old houses make noises, they said. It's nothing. But it wasn't nothing. One night, I couldn't sleep. I stared up at the ceiling, tracking every creak and groan, and then I heard something different, a dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor upstairs. It scraped along for what felt like hours. And then a low whisper, so faint I thought I was imagining it. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The next morning, I found something strange. Dusty footprints leading down the staircase from the 3rd floor. But they weren't footprints exactly. They were bare, but wrong. The toes were too long, the arch twisted unnaturally. They ended just outside my door. I begged my parents to leave. I cried, screamed, threatened. They told me not to be silly. 2 nights later, everything changed. I woke up to the sound of my doorknob rattling softly. Not shaking, just turning, gently like someone was testing it. I bolted upright, heart hammering. The footsteps returned, pacing just outside. Then, a whisper so close it felt like it was inside my head. Let me in. I threw the blanket over my head, trembling. Something pressed against the blanket. A hand. No, not a hand. Something with too many fingers, too many joints, traced the shape of my face through the fabric. I don't remember falling asleep. Maybe I passed out from fear. By morning, the footprints were gone, but the 3rd floor door, it was open, wide open. I tried to tell my parents again, but they barely listened. Dad promised he'd nail it shut, said he'd handle it. That night, I heard hammering from upstairs, then silence, then screaming. By the time I ran to the hallway, the screaming had stopped. The front door stood wide open, swinging on its hinges. My parents were gone. No sign of a struggle. No blood. Just the faint, dusty footprints trailing out into the woods. They were never found. Now it's just me in this rotting old house. I tried to leave. I packed a bag, ran as fast as I could down the dirt road, but no matter how far I went, I always ended up back at the front door. Always. The house at night, the thing on the third floor paces endlessly. It doesn't bother whispering anymore. It's waiting for me to come up. And sometimes when I lie perfectly still, I hear it descending the stairs, one slow step at a time, closer and closer and closer.
Story number 8.
When I was in college, I worked the night shift at a small gas station on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place where nothing much happened, just the occasional trucker filling up, the odd insomniac buying cigarettes at 3 a.m. I liked the solitude, the hum of the fluorescent lights, the sense that the world had gone to sleep and I was the only one awake. But there were rules. They weren't written down anywhere. They were passed along in whispers from one employee to the next. Rule 1. If a man in a wide-brimmed hat comes in and doesn't speak, don't look at him. Rule 2. If the security cameras go black, hide behind the counter and don't move until they come back on. Rule 3. Never, under any circumstances, open pump 6 after midnight. I thought it was a joke, a hazing ritual for the new guy. Until my 3rd week on the job. It was a Tuesday, quiet. The clock above the register ticked past midnight, and almost immediately the lights outside flickered. The pumps sputtered to a halt. The security cameras snapped to static. And a car pulled into pump 6. It wasn't a car exactly. It looked like one, an old black sedan, but the edges shimmered, like it wasn't really there. Like it was just pretending. The driver stepped out. He was tall, inhumanly so, with limbs just a little too long, joints bending wrong under a tattered coat. His face was hidden beneath the brim of a battered hat. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stood there, waiting. I ducked behind the counter, heart pounding, trying to follow the rules. Don't move. Don't make a sound. For a long, awful moment, there was only silence. Then slowly, the door creaked open. Footsteps, wet, heavy, slapped against the tile. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to disappear. The footsteps stopped just behind the counter. I could feel him there, watching, his breath rattling in and out, the stench of rotting leaves and wet earth filling my nostrils. A cold, spindly hand slid something across the counter. I waited. Minutes, hours, time didn't seem to matter anymore. When I finally dared to peek, the store was empty again. The cameras flickered back to life. The pumps whirred. Everything looked normal, except for the thing on the counter. It was an old, cracked Polaroid photo of me, standing behind the counter, smiling. Except the figure in the hat was standing behind me in the photo, one hand resting on my shoulder. I hadn't seen him there before. I quit the next day, didn't bother picking up my last paycheck. But the story doesn't end there, because last week I found another Polaroid tucked into my mailbox, a fresh one, me asleep in my bed, and that same figure standing in the corner of my room, hat low over his face, waiting, watching, and every night since, I wake up to find my bedroom door open just a little wider than I left it. I don't think I'm alone anymore, and I'm afraid the next photo won't be of me sleeping. It'll be of me missing.
Story number 9.
When I was a child, my family lived in a crumbling Victorian house that backed up against a dense, ancient forest. There was an old tale in the town about the woods, how at night the trees moved closer to the house, inch by inch, branches scraping across the windows, roots cracking the foundation. They called it the creeping grove. No one believed it, of course. Just a story to scare kids. Until the night my brother vanished. It started small, branches tapping against the glass even when there was no wind, dead leaves piling up in the hallway overnight even though the doors were locked tight, whispers carried in through the vents, dry, cracking voices that didn't belong to any living thing. My brother Danny loved the woods. He wasn't afraid like I was. He'd stand at the back door at night, staring out into the blackness, listening. "They're calling me," he said once, his face pale and slack like he wasn't really there. That night, the house felt wrong, heavy, breathing. I woke to the sound of footsteps outside my bedroom door. I thought it was Mom or Dad, until I heard the creaking, like wood bending under pressure, groaning. I got up and opened my door. Danny was standing at the end of the hall, facing the back door, wide open to the forest. The trees were closer, so close now I could see bark splintering off in slow, deliberate movements, vines snaking across the threshold. Danny didn't move as I called out to him. He just stepped outside. The trees swallowed him whole. I screamed for my parents, but by the time they rushed downstairs, Danny was gone. The police searched for weeks. They found no footprints, no torn clothes, no signs of struggle, just a trail of small, smooth stones leading deeper into the woods. They called it an accident, said he must have run away. But I knew better, because after Danny disappeared, the trees didn't retreat. They kept creeping closer. The branches scraped harder at the windows at night, carving long gouges into the glass like desperate fingernails. Roots burst through the basement floor. Mold and rot spread like wildfire up the walls. One night, I found something tucked under my pillow. A single perfect leaf, bright green and freshly plucked, still damp with morning dew. But it wasn't the season for green leaves, and the leaf had a tiny symbol scratched into it, a spiral spinning endlessly inward. That night, I dreamed of Danny. He was standing in the forest, smiling too wide, his eyes black and empty. His body wasn't right. His arms were too long, his neck too thin. The bark of the trees had grown over him, weaving into his skin like armor. He whispered to me, "Come back. It's better here. You'll see." I woke with dirt under my fingernails and pine needles tangled in my hair. We moved soon after. But sometimes at night I still hear the tapping at my window. Not from a branch, from fingers, scratching, asking to be let in. And once, just once, I swore I saw a figure standing at the edge of the woods near our new house. Tall, too thin, smiling, waiting.
Story number 10.
When I was 20, I took a job house-sitting for a wealthy couple in the middle of nowhere. Their mansion sat on top of a lonely hill, surrounded by nothing but empty fields and a decaying forest. They were going to be gone for 2 months, and all I had to do was water the plants, feed the cat, and never go into the basement. Simple enough. The house was beautiful but old, high ceilings, long, echoing hallways, rooms filled with antiques that seemed to watch you when you weren't looking. The first few nights were uneventful, except for the dreams, strange dreams, of dark, narrow staircases spiraling endlessly downward, of whispering voices that called my name from under the floorboards. I shrugged them off. Stress, probably. Big house, too much silence. Until one night, the cat disappeared. Her name was Minx, a little black thing with yellow eyes. She usually curled up by the fireplace at night, purring herself to sleep. But when I woke at 2 a.m., the fire was dead, and Minx was nowhere to be found. I called for her, searched the kitchen, the study, the bedrooms. Eventually, I heard her, a low, pitiful meow coming from behind the basement door, the one I was told never to open. I stood there for a long time, heart hammering. The meowing got weaker, like she was hurt or farther away. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door. The stairs beyond were steep, descending into darkness so thick my flashlight barely pierced it. The air was freezing and smelled like damp stone and something else, something metallic and sweet. I called for Minx again. A soft thump answered me from below. I took a few cautious steps down. The door creaked shut behind me, plunging the staircase into almost total darkness. I stumbled forward, one hand on the wall, feeling along the rough, damp stone. That's when I realized the staircase was spiraling much deeper than it should have, way deeper than the house's foundations, way deeper than anything normal. And the meowing? It wasn't coming from a cat anymore. It was something else, mimicking the sound. Badly, the cries twisted into a wet, guttural croaking, like a throat trying to shape human words but getting them wrong. I turned to run, but the staircase kept spiraling, curving in ways that didn't make sense. The walls pulsed slightly, like they were breathing. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment I saw something. Not a cat. A thing. Crawling along the walls, all pale limbs and stitched eyes, dragging a long, broken jaw across the floor. It grinned at me, teeth too many, too sharp. I screamed and bolted upward, not caring if I stumbled or fell. Somehow, I burst through the door, slamming it behind me. I jammed the lock into place and backed away, shaking. The house was wrong now. Colder, darker. Every hallway seemed longer, stretching into black corridors filled with unseen things. Minx never came back. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At dawn, I packed my things and fled, leaving a hurried note for the owners explaining that something had happened. Something bad. They never contacted me. No phone call, no email, nothing. When I tried to drive back weeks later, I found an empty hill, no house, no trees, just dead grass. And in the dirt where the mansion once stood, I found a door, half buried, locked tight. But when I put my ear to it, I swear I heard scratching and a voice, broken and hoarse, trying to say my name.